two other technologies that are worthy of mention. One is energy storage, and this is going to become more and more part of the discussion. And those who are deeply involved in grid-scale renewables know that at some point when renewables exceed 10 or 20% of the total input, depending on the capacity of the grid, you have instabilities that need to be modified by energy storage. And there is a huge push to bring energy storage technologies online. And one third technology I'll add to this, and if we have time, come back to some other points, but you're going to hear more and more about microgrids. And essentially a microgrid is essentially a combination of solar and hopefully storage on a small scale that can be disrupted from the grid. And given the strength of the tourism industry and hotels throughout the Caribbean region, I think the role of microgrids is one that we will need to be thinking about more and more, including in the clean energy strategy.
I completely agree. And because of the intermittence of renewable energy systems and the fact that most of the islands have very small loads and traditional power generation systems which are not very flexible, energy storage and smart grids are going to be an essential component. And I think the Caribbean region really has a unique opportunity to attract investments in these research and developments in these fields. There are a lot of companies that are very, very excited to deploy, and these systems are expensive. Energy storage systems are expensive. They make a lot more sense when you're competing with very high energy costs, such as we have in the Caribbean. So it makes a lot of sense for Caribbean islands to incentivize developers of energy storage technologies to come in. What's really important to do as part of that process is to make sure that we have locals being hired and being trained by these development companies, so that eventually when we do have viable energy storage and smart grid technologies that work in the small islands, we have developed a workforce that can be exported elsewhere as energy storage and microgrids become more and more prevalent throughout the world.
Thank you for that. The second question will be directed towards you, Diana, and I'd ask, again, Mark and Raul to follow up with a very short complimentary response to that. The question is, what are the necessary ingredients to most effectively unlock finance to facilitate capital investment in renewables in the Caribbean?
Thanks. I wanted to, highlight 2 points in answer to that question. Most critically, I would say, is that individual countries need to think about where to put the focus. Is it hydro? Is it geothermal? Is it solar? Is it wind? What is the best resource to really focus on in developing in an individual island nation? And then to back that up then, create a really thoughtful plan as to how to develop that resource and put the regulatory, legal environment in place to encourage investment in that specific sector or perhaps sectors. And that takes the part even looking at, what Mark mentioned, energy efficiency as well. That's a whole other area to look at. And then once that program is in place, that gives investors confidence that there is a transparent, clear path to making an investment in that sector and in that country. And as a brief example, in late 2007, 2008, the country of India decided they really wanted to focus on developing solar. There was not one grid-connected solar power plant in the entire country of India until 2009, and the first one was 2 megawatts. And OPIC financed that with a $6 million loan. Today, there are 2,000 megawatts of solar plants under operation in India in 5 years. And they have a massive goal, to hit till the year 2022 of 20 gigawatts. The point being that before anybody made that investment, they put in the regulatory, legal, policy environment in place and created something called the National Solar Mission. And that spearheaded the whole program. That's not to say there haven't been hiccups and it's not difficult and it's not challenging, but it can be done. So I would say that The focus really needs to be on what is the best resource to focus on initially, and then how do you put the regulations in place to back it up. And I just want to close by saying, I was at a sustainable finance conference a couple weeks ago, and one thing that is very clear to me when you talk to institutional investors, when you talk to NGOs, when you talk to development banks, there's a ton of money out there. There's no shortage of money. OPIC alone has billions of dollars in its portfolio and billions more to lend. And that's one small US government agency. So the money is there. I think it's really about putting everything in place to facilitate that money coming into the market.
Thank you. So there's much to be said along these lines about the roles of both mechanisms for financing, think from bond financing of ESCOs to risk mitigation and credit enhancement and all kinds of topics like that. And there's another similar topic that could be discussed about the role of enablers, whether they are ombudsmen or packagers or project developers to accelerate this. But I think I'd like to kind of go in a little bit of a different direction, and that is, I'd like to suggest there is an important role for the Caribbean collectively and for different countries individually to kind of put a stake in the ground to be a pioneer in the clean energy space. And to give you an example, I have a colleague who has looked at, coming back to energy storage, has looked at over 75 energy storage companies that are developing advanced technologies for balancing grid and balancing renewables out. And I can tell you that at least half of those companies talk about having a strategy to put energy storage in islands, because they know that between the high cost and the availability of renewable resources. And what I'd like to suggest is to take a philosophy and put out a vision where new technologies are embraced for pilot and demonstration projects. And this is a really important and maybe even crying need in the technology community. And to think of these technologies in a similar way of leapfrogging other technologies, not to wait until they've been proven in the US and in Europe and in other countries, but to actually invite companies to make demonstrations and to get these technologies out there, because the companies are there and they're interested and willing, and there should be some kind of channel this would send a very powerful signal that the clean energy is embraced in the Caribbean. And just to take this idea of putting a clean energy vision out in the world, I'll just throw out quickly a couple of ideas. I mean, one, this vision can be taken globally, it can be, regionally, let me say, or countrywide, but it can also be by sectors. And we mentioned microgrids before. The tourism sector is really one that is, I think, ripe for clean energy technologies and microgrids. And this is not just an ad hoc kind of thought, but this can improve the marketability of the sector, it can reduce the costs of the sector, and perhaps most importantly, improves the resilience of the facilities. And resilience and renewable energy and clean energy are ideas that are becoming more and more closely tied together. And just one last thought really quickly. I think an exciting example of this vision of making a statement to the world would be if there was a country or an island that installed a wireless solar-powered electric vehicle recharging network. And this could provide, it could even be set up and financed to provide free electricity to vehicles that are so started. These technologies exist, and one of the interesting things about islands is that you don't have the range anxiety, which is an inhibitor for electric vehicle adoption in places like the United States. And you could, if you look at Tesla, for example, if you buy a Tesla car, you get free electricity for life, free fuel for life if you charge at one of their facilities. And these kinds of ideas could be started with fleets, whether it's rental cars or commercial fleets or something. But I have a bit of a privilege, I think, of seeing the cusp of what's coming down the pike in technologies and where companies are that are bringing these technologies to adoption. And so this is something that I think would be very exciting. I think it would attract tourism and certainly put somebody on the map.
So Raul, a very quick response from you, please.
Okay, I want to say that those are extremely exciting concepts. I think from the point of view of an investor looking at the Caribbean, and just basically the frustrations that come out are very basic. And the first one is the stability of the legal structure. When we look at renewable energy development in many of these islands, there needs to be a more stable and reliable structure that we can look at with regards to development, so that we can know what we expect going in, and so that the financial community can also know. There also needs to be a commitment by the community, by the countries, not only that, yeah, we want to do renewables, but how much we're going to do. There has to be a consensus within the islands of where the renewables are going to happen, what part of the land we're going to be able to devote to it, so that when projects come in, there's not this debate that each project originator needs to go through to try to figure out where the project can happen and how it can happen. I think that it's also important to have international standards. I think most countries understand this from the point of view of technology. However, I think we need to have understandable international standards with regards to the laws that affect the development of renewable energies. And somebody earlier spoke about stable taxation systems, stable property laws that we can understand as international investors that can make those investments make sense. And finally, it's important for the early adopters for the first projects that there be some sort of backstop, either coming from the country itself or from international organizations, to make sure that the investing community feels safe making these investments in spite of perceived country risks.
Thank you for that. For the third and final question, Raul, you'll take the lead on this. I'm going to ask you to keep it to 1 minute if that's okay, and then Diana and then Jacques-Philippe to finish. And following the theme from the previous panel, I think an important question is how can interested investors support renewable investment in the Caribbean? And are there opportunities to leverage the diaspora and local resources to facilitate this investment?
Absolutely, in a minute. Yeah, well, I think money speaks, and I think that money talks, and it's important for investors to repeatedly go to energy ministers and heads of energy departments in conferences such as this, and also visiting the island states, not just once but often, so that they know that there's a real sustainable interest by the investment community, by developers, to have these projects happen. That will promote these energy ministers and other types of departments to go to the governments and convince their governments that it's worthwhile to have sustainable energy policy that will attract investments. And I think it's very important also for the investment community and the diaspora community to be aware of the fact that local investors and real bona fide local investors are essential for any of these projects to make sense. Local investors make the islands feel that the projects belong to them and give stability to the industry as a whole.
I would add that looking then at investment from the debt side, since that's what I would know best, that I would say that as a lender, what I try to do is to be very clear on what the expectation is. If you want to build a project, you need to understand not only what the expectations of your equity investors are, but what the expectation is of also the lender. So I feel that in my role, it's important to set very clear guidelines so that when investors come to me with a business plan, they know what the expectation is, they know how to build out this project, and even if it's early stage, then a year later they come back, they know the types of things a lender wants to see if they want to be willing to take a project through the process of approval and a final disbursement. And then with respect to involving community outside of any individual country, I would say that it's pretty critical. I would say the most successful projects I've been a part of are those that have included a mix of investors, which include maybe international investors, but always a local counterparty, because it's critical for someone in that investor group to truly understand the country and the environment. And I think it's very difficult often for companies or investors to go in that really truly don't have a sense of the environment in which they are dealing.
I would basically support what my co-panelists have mentioned. It really comes down to money and time collectively, and it is different depending on the specific island. So for example, I know with Haiti, you're looking at 20 to 30% of the GDP, which comes from remittances. So that's a large pool of capital that helps to foster growth. With that being said, it's generally small amounts from a lot of people. So the reality is the biggest value from the diaspora, in my opinion, is time. Right? And I think there's tremendous value with respect to the know-how, the creativity, the work. Again, with Haiti, there are about 10 to 12 million people in Haiti, but there are about 4 million globally. And if you think of it completely together, you have something like 90% of college grads living outside of the country. And so I think there's something to be said about just being engaged, right? Providing your time and creativity and ideas. Try to think of some of the ideas that Mark mentioned and other ideas that we were talking about. The diaspora brings a different perspective that any key investor, irrespective of where they're from, will benefit from having as part of that team. And I know oftentimes we point the finger that we're not being included, but we're all creative, we're hardworking, we know how to get involved, but you have to want it. And so I think that's what it comes down to.
Well, thank you, everyone. And if I can just conclude, I think it's very evident that, you know, the Caribbean being sandwiched in between North America and South America can also, you know, in the past has often been influenced by large countries, you know, in terms of policy. But renewable energy is an incredible opportunity for the Caribbean community to define and realize its own vision for a clean economy, and in turn, sustain economic progress. I just want to thank you. Thank you.